My name is Gitika Gorthi, and today I'm very, very excited and honored to be interviewing a very special space champion who I greatly look up to, Dr. Ronak Shah. Dr. Shah is the current Aerospace Medicine Director at UTMB and has previously served as the Medical Director at Johnson Space Center. I remember reading his background and was incredibly in awe of the work he's done in aerospace medicine. And so today I'm really excited to dive into his journey, what led him to his field, and how he transitioned from being at NASA to now being more in an educational and academia space. So, welcome, Dr. Shah. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders.
Well, thank you for having me. And I will say, to reciprocate in kind, I have been tracking some of your efforts as well, both domestically and internationally, and it is quite profound. It's quite impressive as you talk about inspiring the next generation. Here you are saying that about me for you, but I watch you doing the same to the successive generations. So I also appreciate what it is that you are doing at a global level. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just remember growing up, like I never knew that aerospace medicine was a real career that one could pursue. And seeing individuals like yourself currently doing it and showing that it is a real space and creating more opportunities for new students, I have to wonder, where did your inspiration for space and medicine come together? So my first question for you is, what was the aha moment that inspired you to enter the aerospace sector? And how did you specifically discover aerospace medicine?
So I'm going to date myself, but it is what it is. You know, I grew up in an era where I just loved aviation. I loved space. I remember fighting for the window seat when my family went on an airplane so I could look out the window. All of these cliched things. If I had Legos, I'd build an airplane or a rocket. All of these cliched things. And it is a native interest from youth that was just there. If I had an encyclopedia where I said I was dating myself, we had encyclopedias, I would always gravitate to the letter A and look up airplane, aircraft carrier, and this is something that just stayed with me. And I went through life, through all of my education, and it was when I did my residency in internal medicine. I was in New Jersey, and it just occurred to me one day. I said, there has to be a way to find a synergy between these fields. And the power that you have at your fingertips today, both with the mobile devices, the internet of course, is profound. It's incredible. But it was much more primitive 20 years ago. So it started off as a search in the hospital library, going online, and eventually making a series of cold phone calls, cold emails saying, hi, my name is blank, I'm interested in blank, are you the right person to talk to? And it is a much longer conversation, probably for another day, but eventually I meandered and I discovered the University of Texas Medical Branch, specifically their RAM, or their residency in aerospace medicine. And I made a phone call. And what I learned is that every summer they offered a course called PASM, Principles of Aviation and Space Medicine. And it is a very intense 3-week course where the who's who of aerospace medicine are brought in to teach all topics. And I was invited, why don't you come down and take this class? So I did. And very quickly, within the first week, I realized this is what I've been looking for. And it resonated so well with me. And that was that inflection point in my career where I said, I'm committing myself to this.
Amazing. Yeah, I think a lot of students can, I mean, I can specifically relate to what you said. I used, a simple Google search to figure out that aerospace medicine was a real career, but I'm glad that you were able to, not glad, I think this was your effort. You didn't just come across it, but you made that conscious effort to seek after it and cold email people and figure out what opportunities lay here and kind of explore it. So I think that self-initiative definitely brought you to aerospace medicine. And so now that it's been 10, 20 years since when you started aerospace medicine or really got into this field, I feel like a lot has changed, but there's still so much more to go in this field. And so,
Mhm.
in your beliefs, what are the current main areas of practice and research for aerospace medicine physicians and professionals? What are their current main responsibilities as a physician?
So the model that we adopt for educating our physicians, it can be seen as an end-to-end model of training and or the spectrum of care. And that is when you start breaking things apart into pre-flight, in-flight, post-flight. It's a very rudimentary way of doing it, but for the purpose of dialogue, I think it's a great schematic. And with pre-flight, you start to look at what does it take to select a crew member? And it's worth noting there's parallel themes here. There's the government, NASA, professional astronaut, and then you have the private sector or the commercial sector, which is a little bit different in how you perceive these individuals. These individuals may not necessarily be applying to become an astronaut for the next 10 to 15 years, whereas with NASA, it's a much longer game. And so if you start to look at this, what does it take to select an astronaut? What are the requirements? Should the requirements be the same for someone who's a long-term career astronaut versus a short-term model? And then you start to look at what does it take to keep that individual healthy prior to flight. If you do find medical issues, how do you diagnose and treat these people to a degree where they can be certified for flight, meaning they can safely fly? And that's a key piece of the education that is different than terrestrial medicine. And as you see more and more individuals and have access to space, we are going to see greater pathology. So a key focus of this is understanding that and understand that pathology in the flight environment. What do we need to do on the ground to mitigate risk in the sky? Then as you transition to the in-flight environment, we look at everything such as regular health and wellness, talking about how you handle acute situations or emergencies, operational endeavors like EVA, extravehicular activity, or the spacewalks, and then of course when you come back home, the post-flight rehabilitation. And then you have those dynamic phases of flight, launch, landing. EVA is a good example. So when you think about the breadth of information one needs to learn, there's both a clinical aspect as well as a non-clinical aspect. The clinical aspect could certainly be the physiological changes of the flight environment, altered pressure, altered gas, thermal, acoustics, vibration, radiation. The list really just goes on and on and on, which, by the way, this is all part of what we teach you in the first year of training, your Master's of Science in Aerospace Medicine, which is year one of a 2-year training path. We also have to teach you some of the non-clinical things as well: risk management, probabilistic risk assessment, thinking about policy and how one might go about drafting policy. And again, the list continues. So we really look at the spectrum of care of pre-flight, in-flight, post-flight, clinical things, non-clinical things, operational matters. It's a very long list, but we try to be quite comprehensive. We also work, I think it's worth noting, when we try to look at how we educate, we really rely on the experts in the field. And so we are very proud of these strong collegial relationships that we have with the government sector, military, academia, commercial space flight, and we bring in these incredible leaders from all angles of industry to teach our RAMs. And so, for example, if we want to talk and teach our physicians a little bit about systems engineering and how the doctor integrates with the engineering side, is the right person to bring in someone who's a practicing physician, or maybe someone who's been a practicing engineer? And we, for now, are doing the latter, where we brought in someone with over 20 years of experience as a biomedical engineer with spaceflight. And this individual has custom created content for our doctors so that they can better understand the role that they play in the flight environment. So these are the types of things we try to do to be innovative, but also to comprehensively educate our physicians.
That's incredible. And when it comes on this topic of aerospace medicine, we clearly know why we need aerospace medicine physicians and professionals who are in this space to take care of astronauts, protect astronaut health for short and long-term flight. And as you mentioned, pre and post-flight. But a lot of times, and I know we talked about this previously, we hear many medical students hearing that this, choosing the aerospace medicine path may not be a full-time career. So
Mhm.
what is that, in your opinion, a true statement or false statement? Do you think as an aerospace medicine professional, you're still dedicated to whatever specialization you chose to be as a physician, and then you
Mhm.
add on aerospace medicine? Or do you believe that aerospace medicine on its own can serve as a full-time sole career for an individual?
There's a degree of flexibility in your question. And so if you look at how we select people into our program, we are certainly looking for people who come in with a background in some clinical field. By the metrics, by the numbers, most folks come in with either internal medicine or emergency medicine, followed in third place, I'd say, by family practice. But that is not to suggest to someone, hey, the best way of getting into this program is do emergency medicine or internal medicine. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is tends to be that we see those numbers. However, if you look historically at our program, we have individuals come through with backgrounds in psychiatry, neurology, um, um, psych, internal medicine, of course, emergency medicine, family practice, uh, general surgery, PM&R. We've had a whole splattering of folks. And we take that skill set and we build on top of it with aerospace medicine, right? Now, to come to the part of the question of what is your job, whenever I see medical students who are interested in this field, I like to ask the question, it's okay. I say it's okay to have multiple interests, but what do you envision as your 8 to 5 job, right? What does your Monday through Friday look like? Is it aerospace medicine and then moonlighting shifts on the weekend for emergency, or is it the other way around? Because right now, if you look at most folks who are colleagues of mine, we do the aerospace Monday through Friday, and sometimes on weekends and nights. But then you may do moonlighting shifts in urgent care, emergency room, etc., to maintain those other skills. So if someone comes along and says, I really have a passion for X, a certain field, but I also have an interest in space, I'm like, well, that's great. Understand that the space aspect is a bona fide field of medicine. It is an accredited, established field of medicine like any other, like pediatrics, like internal medicine, like psychiatry, emergency medicine. It is an established ACGME accredited residency. So if you have an interest, that's great. Understand there's a lot to learn, right? Um, we do have folks that are interested in this field that would like to be involved in research. And I do believe that there should be opportunities for them to get some exposure to the field so they can do more meaningful or contribute more greatly to the research sector. I think PASM is a great opportunity to get exposed to sensitize folks, maybe 1 layer deep, maybe 1.5 layers deep. Um, and that's one great course that the university offers. Johnson Space Center has a clerkship for medical students, and that is offered twice a year. That's also a great opportunity for folks to get exposed to or sensitized to things. So anything someone can do to greatly expose themselves or better expose themselves, I think is beneficial.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification because I think, at least from what I've been able to see and understand, I think that's always like a point of confusion, or not even confusion, but a point that deters a lot of students away, thinking that the aerospace medicine may not, it's not something that is a viable career to pursue, but it is an accredited program, as you mentioned. It is something you can do 9 to 8 or like full time if you'd like to. And there's different aspects of the field you can go into, whether it be research or actually interacting with the astronauts. There's different areas you can explore. And so thank you for that clarification.
I will add, I'm probably one of the few people, probably not certainly not the only one, but one of the few that in my career since graduation from the program, so I did internal medicine originally in the Northeast, and I was in private practice. And during that time, I maintained my concurrent interest in aerospace, and I worked to build my application. And eventually, I made my way into the program. But once I graduated, I spent over a decade working at Johnson Space Center in various capacities. I started off on the research side with NASA's Human Research Program and transitioned into leadership roles with a team called XMC, or Exploration Medical Capability. A lot of folks know what that is. And I served as the deputy element scientist and the element scientist. I then transitioned into medical operations, and I provided a great deal of support in NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab. I deployed to Russia to Star City for nearly 3 months, provided medical support to the crew members training on the ground out there. And then I had the opportunity, and this is where I spent the majority of my time, just over half a decade, as medical director for NASA's Johnson Space Center. And in that capacity, I was providing both clinical oversight as well as administrative oversight for the healthcare that was provisioned to the astronaut corps. And so when you look back, at that just 10 years, you're looking at research, operations, more clinical, administrative. So to the heart of your question, can you do this as a full-time job? Yes. And there is a lot to be done. And with the way space is growing, there's even more to be done.
Definitely. Yes. And you mentioned a really good point. And you mentioned first off, if you'd like, To backtrack, I think something that stood out with from what you said in your journey is you had to build up your credibility in this space when you initially started, to build up your experience in aerospace medicine. And you mentioned the clerkship at the NASA Johnson Space Center. How would you recommend students who are maybe are in medical school right now who want to pursue aerospace medicine but don't have any credibility in this space yet? What suggestions or programs would you suggest that they apply for in order to kind of build up their experience to be able to apply for a residency program in aerospace medicine and then actually pursue a career in this space? Do you have any that stand out to you?
I often get asked this question, and there is no rubric that says, oh, you did this plus 2 points. You did this plus 3 points. We do not have that. What we look for is an aggregate of the individual, right? As a whole package. We read through your application line by line by line. And I say we because there is a big team. It is not me. It is not any one person, but as a team, we sit down and discuss what did we find during the interviews? What did we find as we went through the application? So we read individually, then we come together. And it's also multidisciplinary. It's not all doctors that are looking at it. It's also not all UTMB. We may invite other stakeholders who are involved with the day-to-day operations for spaceflight to speak up. So a lot of folks are looking at the applicant. So if you walk in and say, man, I think that one interview went wrong, don't worry, there's plenty more. But when you look at an application, what I personally did was I started to meet people. And I cannot emphasize the value of working on communication skills. People often call it a soft skill, and I don't like that phrase because it is a critical skill. How do you, again, going back, how do you approach someone? How do you make a cold approach, a cold call, a cold email? How do you be respectful of people's time? How do you navigate those things? It's very important. How do you navigate working as a team? Leadership skills, followership skills, these are all important. And so for me, I always felt that professional development was a key part of what I should be doing, in addition to academic development. But when I started to work towards building my application, I said the only way to show or convey how serious I am is to just keep going. So when opportunities avail themselves, I would go, and people see that. They see the repetition, they see your involvement, they see your engagement. So activities, for example, for me, certainly it started by taking that course at PASM, networking with people, keeping in touch with them, seeing if there was opportunities for work. And even if there wasn't, at least in my mind, I said, hey, now this person knows that I exist. I might be minute, but at least someone knows I exist. And then you keep doing it, and then awareness grows. I then took personal time off so I could come attend the Aerospace Medical Association annual scientific meeting. And I would go and I would network. And AMSRO, the Aerospace Medicine Student Resident Organization, is a very large, robust group that does so much today. It's really impressive. If you go back then, AMSRO was this tiny little group of maybe 10 people meeting after hours, just trying to get started. And it's incredible to see how it has grown by orders of magnitude. But I started by doing that, PASM, by volunteering to work with one of the flight surgeons at NASA and helping them with a research project for a month. I barely went out. I just said, let me just get here, get my work done, focus on this, and create a product that was meaningful to my mentor. Then I went to asthma. So these were the types of things I did. And so that when I sat down at the interviews, I can talk about, let me show you how I've demonstrated my interest. Here's the work I've done. Here are the things I've supported and attended. And I think that goes a long way. AMSRO's outreach is much stronger now. I know there are many chapters across the nation. I know that at individual universities or medical schools, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, you have individual leaders saying, hey, can we start something? Can we start an interest group? Can we get someone to come here and speak? And I think those are critical things because aerospace medicine is not part of the foundational curriculum in medical school. Whereas cardiology and pulmonary and GI and derm and everything else is, aerospace medicine remains an established field of medicine, but there is no formalized training series nationwide. And so it's actually for this reason that UTMB, just to try to broaden access to education, we invite anybody who wants to dial into grand rounds, right? You can come to grand rounds and listen to speakers. We have put together a couple of didactic videos on YouTube. We just started our YouTube channel. We have, I think, 3 videos up there, free access, taught by bona fide individuals, talking about certain principles of aerospace medicine, and we're hoping to do more. So you asked the question of what people can do. If you have the opportunity to take PASM or at least apply for PASM, please do, because it is an application process. Applying to the clerkship, joining AMSRO, supporting those meetings, grand rounds. There's a whole host of things that we've discussed in the past 5 minutes. So any of the above.
Yeah, and it's really certain just hearing you talk that there are so many opportunities that have opened up in the past 10, 15 years that maybe previously weren't there. And even as you mentioned, the Aerospace Medicine Scientific meeting, the annual meeting, I remember the first time that I went, I honestly didn't realize how big the community of professionals in aerospace medicine was until I got there. And there were, I want to say, thousands of doctors and physicians and PhD researchers, scientists who were there talking about their current work, and it was just mind blowing. And so, as a student, there are scholarship opportunities you can apply for to attend these conferences for the first time. And as you mentioned, AMSRO is a great student community to join to really get your hands into this space as an undergrad, medical, or residency student. So, really, the opportunities are there. You just have to kind of look for them and open those doors for yourself.
You
Um,
have to. You have to be proactive. You know, there's a mentality, unfortunately, amongst some, not all, that they want it to come to them. I said, no, you need to seek it out. It's there's reciprocity. And as we're speaking, one more event comes to mind that I would be remiss if I didn't mention, and that is the Human Research Program Investigators Workshop, or IWS, and that is open to all. It generally takes place in Galveston, Texas, in January, late January. They can just search it online and find it. But that if you have a particular proclivity towards research, that is a great event to attend, listen in. So there's so many opportunities for this. And at the international level, I mentioned before we started recording, I mentioned to you I was actually at ICAM, the International Congress of Aerospace Medicine. And what's nice about ICAM is it enables access to other people who are geographically closer to that locale, right? Perhaps flying to the United States is cost prohibitive and staying here. But when you have an opportunity in, say, Western Europe, other countries may have greater access to come there. So there are so many ways to try to connect and get involved and partake in this field.
Definitely, yes. And as I have so many questions for you, I know we're almost running out of time, but one of the other questions that I'm curious about, hearing your experience coming both from as a physician working at NASA, now at UTMB, one of the leading members in aerospace medicine, how do you see this field evolving in the next maybe 15 years? How do you see the current work that's being done changing? And what do you think are the areas that we need to most focus on? For the next training, the next professionals in this field?
That's a loaded question. And if we go a few minutes over, it's okay by me. It is a loaded question because that is something that our faculty, our core faculty, discusses all the time. So let me take a moment to give my tip of the hat to our core faculty. We have our residency program director, the associate director, the program manager, the administrative support, other faculty, and we will sit down. And here's the thing, all of us, and I think you know who they are, but all of us have this common feature of being board certified in aerospace medicine, right? We all check that box. We're all together there. However, we have someone who's from emergency medicine. We have 2 internists. We have somebody who's family practice sports med. And when you look at that, and then you look at what our career trajectories were, they're very different, right? You know mine. I mentioned it earlier. Then our residency program director is Serena Anyan Chancellor. She's a flown physician astronaut. So she has the perspective of being a flight surgeon who has rendered the care to crew, and then being a crew member who was recipient of the care that is rendered. Then you have someone like Dr. Krakis, who is an educator at heart and has worked diligently to adapt and modify our new Masters of Science in Aerospace Medicine. And she does commercial crew. You have someone like Dr. Cho, who is an operational flight surgeon who was downrange in Kazakhstan very recently to help bring her crew member back home when she returned from space. So when you bring together this diverse team of individuals, what it allows us to do is, again, in a panoramic fashion, look at that exact question you asked. What does the future look like? How do we adapt our curriculum to meet future needs? And so when you look, for example, at our MS in aerospace medicine, and the high level bullets is on our website in terms of what we go through, um, that in itself reflects how we adapt. And so, for example, when we talk, what I do is I will sit down and meet with the chief medical officers of various companies and ask one simple question. No PowerPoint, just a cup of coffee and a conversation with one question. And that question is, what do you need your doctors to know so that your mission is successful? Right? And that feedback, and we do this with regularity, that feedback is given to me and we modify the curriculum. So for example, an answer that was given to me was complex aeromedical certification. Not, not aeromedical certification, but complex aeromed certification, meaning individuals who come in with pre-existing health issues that say, send me up. So when a 67-year-old who says, I've been smoking half a pack a day for 35 years, I have moderate osteoarthritis in my knees, I had my left hip replaced, I have mild renal insufficiency with this, the list goes on, and they say, hey, I'd like to go to space. How do we do that safely, right? How do we mitigate risk as best possible for that individual? So these are types of things that the companies have, the CMOs have come to me with. Another one said, hey, we're more of a startup company. We could definitely use some help building up some emergency operations and procedures. Okay. Another one comes along and says, can we teach the doctors a little bit more about how you interface with the engineers? Like, okay. And so these are the conversations that lead to adaptations in our curriculum. When you ask the question, so that's how we approach it. So it's always evolving, right? There's always minor deltas year by year by year. And that'll always continue. When you look ahead to the future, 10, 15 years, some of the key differences. Number one, the number of people who will gain access to space is increasing. Number two, and this is by no means a comprehensive list. Number two, when you increase the N, the number of individuals going, what that also suggests is that we will have greater diversity and pathology in these individuals. So I come back to how do you get these people flying in safe space, flying to space safely? Then you also have to look at the mission profiles, right? Are these people going up for a few minutes, a few days, a few months? What is the mission profile? Because that also impacts your risk posture of how you might want to better prepare for on-orbit operations. So understanding that risk posture, understanding how we should be preparing for the future is something that we need to be looking at as well. And then if you start looking at the different mission profiles, where is NASA going? Where might SpaceX be going? Where is Axiom Space or Virgin Galactic going? So there are many, many different inflection points to be observed. And that's something that I do almost on a daily basis, is what's going on, who's going where, what's on the horizon, what's out there to make these changes.
It's a really great point that you mentioned how this field is so dynamic. So, I mean, we could predict something now of what space is going to look like in 10, 15 years, but I'm sure we couldn't have imagined the amount of commercialization we have now, maybe just a few decades ago. So,
Mhm.
understanding these smaller, minute changes and the way the industry is going and evolving that is something I didn't actually realize that the curriculum is modified almost every year, every few years to accommodate for these changes. So
Mhm.
that's wonderful.
And
And
I
so,
will add, when you have that, it is ever more important that we have standardization of this field,
right.
right? So if you hire a family practice physician that trained in, I don't know, Chicago, or you hire someone that trained from Raleigh, North Carolina, from Raleigh, or pick a city. The point is, you have faith in the consistency of the individual that's coming out. It doesn't matter if they train East Coast or West Coast or North or South. There is some established degree of consistency that you, as a company that's hiring this individual, know that you are receiving. And as the field gets bigger, as more companies need this, as more individuals flying to space need this skill set, to me, that rationalizes, it validates the need for heightened scrutiny, for accreditation, for standards, for quality. And it's the standards that enable the quality of a training program, right? And so for me, it's very important that the companies that are hiring our physicians be involved with what we do so they know what they're getting, right? And I wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
Definitely, yes. I agree that I hear a lot of times counselors, guidance counselors, advisors sharing, oh, you want to go into aerospace medicine. And I've shared this with you previously as well. It's a lot of times, oh, it's such a small patient population. I mean, is this something you're going to have a future in? And I think you really just answered that question of this is a growing field. There are statistics to prove it, how just within the past 5 years, the amount of people who need these services have increased greatly. And so, as an aerospace medicine professional, getting the proper training and understanding how there are increased opportunities in this space for you to
Mhm.
actually gain a career in this field is realistic and it is possible. And I think it's very evident from what you've shared. And so now that we were able to learn a little bit about your background as well as your work in this field, my last and final question for you is if you could go back in time, and you've given plenty of advice throughout this interview, but if you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, maybe when you were a college student or you just graduated, what would that advice be?
You are going to encounter failure. Don't give up.
I think that's a
You,
powerful statement in itself. Would you like to explain? Yeah.
well, it was very humbling, for example. I often get asked the question by applicants to our program, I didn't get in, now what? And I said, well, you're talking to somebody who didn't get in, right? I applied for the first time. I was not accepted. I was interviewed. I was not accepted. I came back the following year. I interviewed again. I was not accepted. And I came back the third time around. And at first, you're almost embarrassed to mention that to anyone. But I look back and it is very humbling to now sit in the office that I sit in, right? Where at one time I was on the other side of the table interviewing. And it's a humble reminder, but it also means don't give up. It is a field. You're right. The demand for this field is just increasing. It's incredible. Which on one hand, I'm grateful I'm not competing now, but it is the demand for this field is increasing. The interest is growing, and so when I look back and you look at what it took to get into this field, finding job opportunities, uh, achieving where I wish to be or what I could do, it takes time. But there's nothing in those past 10 years that would change. I have learned so much from all of those different experiences, research and operations and clinical and administrative, that it is the aggregate of all of those experiences that I feel helped me tremendously today to have insight into what goes on. But, you know, maybe to soften the sentence, instead of using failure, to say, don't be afraid of the challenges. You know, you're going to encounter them. If you're expecting an easy, smooth ride, okay, okay. Um, but there will be bumps in the road. But I will tell you, it has been an incredibly rewarding career. I, you know, hats off to all of my friends and colleagues from back in the day with whom I went to medical school. They've pursued their career trajectories and wherever they are, and they're esteemed physicians and whatever roles they do. But I love what I do. The opportunities that I've had to learn something I'm passionate about, to do some really fun things. I mean, flying in a T-38, let's be frank, it's fun. Okay. Going in the zero G aircraft, it's fun. All of these things that you get to do, experiencing a centrifuge, it's fun. Flying in the back of a Chinook in the Army, it was fun. I mean, there's so many fun things you get to do, but it's that synergy between the operational environment, the classroom environment. So it really does bring it together. There's a serious side to all of it. But to me, it's always been incredibly rewarding. Um, If I had to tell my younger self anything, just keep at it. Just keep at it. Um, Not everyone you meet may be the right person to talk to, right? You say, I talked to this person, it may not be the right person, but don't stop, just keep going. I'd also say, just in general, learning some of those skills about being part of a team. Being a team player is such an easy sentence, but what does that mean? And I strongly encourage people to pursue those opportunities. If you get, hey, I have a half day of team building, just do it. It may come across a little tacky, just do it. And then if you get the next opportunity for an 8 hour session or a 2 day session, do it, because that's something I've done a lot of. And you will find that a lot of physicians more and more value that type of training. And so when you look at spaceflight as a whole, that is a team-based environment. It is 100%, 100% a team-based environment. So learning those skills is very, very critical, in my opinion.
It's incredibly, first off, what you mentioned at the beginning is very inspiring. I mean, I hear, my parents always tell me, and I'm sure everyone has heard this at some point, it's like rejection is redirection. You always learn something from some obstacle. And just because, as you
Rejection is
mentioned,
redirection. That's good.
yeah. Just because you get like you don't get something, you are gonna do something else and that'll teach you something. As you mentioned, each of your experiences have helped you to become who you are today. And so, yes, at the moment, it feels terrible to not get what you tried for, but just realizing there's value in other experiences that you're going to get is just as important to understand. And definitely teamwork. I will keep that in mind as a student myself right now to grab those team bonding opportunities.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Dr. Shah, for sharing your story with us today and your journey. I'm sure everyone who's listening, including myself, will take everything you said to heart. I really appreciate your advice and insight into the growing field of aerospace medicine. So thank you so much for your time today.
No, it was a pleasure, and it's always humbling when someone values what I have done to the point where they'd like to hear my story. So thank you for asking. Um, I'm happy to share my story if somebody wants to hear it. So thank you for asking. It's a pleasure to be here. And again, I'm going to close with what I said earlier on. I have been tracking what you've been doing for your work, and it's quite impressive. So please, carry forward. You also are inspiring the next generation on a global scale. So hats off to you for what you do.
Thank you so much.